The moment the card reader beeped and flashed red, the entire restaurant seemed to freeze. The sound was small, mechanical, almost insignificant, yet it carried a weight heavy enough to silence the room. The billionaire standing at the counter felt his chest tighten as the cashier glanced up, confusion flickering across her face. People behind him shifted impatiently, unaware that in that instant, a man who owned companies, skyscrapers, and stocks worth millions felt poorer than he ever had in his life. What followed next was something no one in that restaurant would ever forget, because a poor little girl was about to do the unthinkable. Before the story continues, if you believe in kindness quests, second chances, and stories that remind us humanity still exists, please take a moment to like this video, comment, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these powerful stories alive. His name was Matthew Caldwell, a respected businessman across the United States, known for his sharp mind and relentless drive. He had built his fortune from the ground up, rising from a modest background to a life of luxury few could imagine. Yet success had carved distance between him and the world around him. People saw the tailored suits and expensive watch, but they never saw the loneliness that followed him everywhere. That evening, Matthew had stopped at a small family restaurant in a quiet town, far from boardrooms and headlines, simply because he was tired. Tired of meetings, tired of expectations, tired of a life where every interaction felt transactional. Across the room sat a little girl named Grace Thompson, no more than 7 years old, her feet dangling from a chair far too big for her. She wore a faded sweater and shoes that had clearly been outgrown, and beside her sat her mother, Hannah, whose eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting life without a safety net. Hannah worked 2 jobs and still struggled to keep food on the table. That night, this meal was a rare treat, paid for with careful planning and a few saved dollars. Grace had insisted on coming because she loved watching people, imagining stories about strangers, unaware of how closely she was about to be tied to one. Matthew had ordered without looking at prices, a habit he had never needed to question before. When it came time to pay, he reached for his card with casual confidence, already lost in thought. The decline caught him completely off guard. He tried again, then another card, each attempt ending with the same cold beep. A quiet murmur rippled through the line behind him. Matthew felt heat rush to his face as embarrassment tightened its grip. For the first time in years, he stood helpless, stripped of the shield his wealth usually provided. The truth was simple and cruel. Earlier that day, his accounts had been temporarily frozen due to a massive internal audit triggered by suspected fraud within one of his companies. Lawyers had assured him it would be resolved quickly, but in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was that he could not pay for a simple meal. The irony was almost laughable, if it didn't hurt so deeply. A man who could buy almost anything suddenly could not afford dinner. As the cashier hesitated, unsure what to do, Matthew felt something inside him break, not because of the money, but because of the looks around him. Some were curious, some judgmental, and some quietly satisfied at seeing a powerful man humbled. He considered leaving the food behind and walking out, but his pride resisted, clinging to dignity even as it slipped away. That was when Grace noticed him. From her seat, she had been watching the scene unfold with wide, observant eyes. She didn't understand the concept of billions or frozen accounts, but she understood the feeling on Matthew's face. She recognized it because she had seen it on her mother many times before. Without asking permission, Grace slid off her chair and walked toward the counter, her small footsteps barely making a sound on the floor. Hannah noticed too late, her heart leaping into her throat as she reached out instinctively, but Grace was already there. The little girl stood beside Matthew, reaching into the pocket of her sweater with careful determination. She pulled out a handful of coins and a few crumpled dollar bills, money she had been saving for weeks. It was her treasure, collected from helping neighbors, finding spare change, and receiving small gifts. She placed it gently on the counter, pushing it forward with both hands. Grace looked up at the cashier with innocent seriousness, offering everything she had. She didn't look at Matthew for praise or acknowledgement. To her, this was simply the right thing to do. The restaurant fell silent as people realized what was happening. The sound of coins clinking against the counter echoed louder than the card reader ever had. Matthew felt his throat tighten as he looked down at the money. It wasn't enough to cover the bill, not even close, but the gesture struck him deeper than any financial loss ever could. In that moment, the walls he had built around his heart began to crumble. He saw himself reflected in that child, not as a billionaire, but as a human being who needed help. Hannah rushed forward, apologizing repeatedly, her face flushed with embarrassment and fear. She tried to pull Grace back, explaining they didn't have much and couldn't afford to help others. Grace resisted gently, her small hand still resting on the counter, her expression calm and certain. She believed, without question, that kindness mattered more than scarcity. The cashier's eyes filled with tears as she waved off the payment entirely. Other diners stepped forward, quietly offering to cover the meal. Someone paid for Hannah and Grace's dinner too, insisting it was their turn to help. What began as an awkward moment transformed into something profoundly human, a shared recognition that no one was above needing compassion. Matthew stood there, overwhelmed. He insisted on writing down his name and promised to repay every cent once his accounts were restored, but no one seemed interested in money anymore. What lingered in the air was something far more valuable. Grace returned to her seat, her task complete, unaware of the ripples she had just sent through every soul in that room. That night, Matthew couldn't sleep. He replayed the image of that little girl over and over in his mind. For years, he had believed generosity was about scale, about writing big checks and funding large projects. But Grace had given him something far greater than money. She had reminded him of humility, empathy, and the power of small acts. True to his word, Matthew returned weeks later, not with cameras or publicity, but with gratitude. He quietly paid off every meal in the restaurant that day and set up a fund to support families like Hannah's, ensuring children like Grace wouldn't have to choose between kindness and survival. He sought out Hannah and offered her stable employment within one of his companies, with fair wages and flexible hours, not as charity, but as opportunity. Hannah's life slowly began to change. The constant fear eased, replaced with cautious hope. Grace continued to be herself, generous and curious, never realizing she had altered the course of a man's life. Matthew, once isolated by wealth, found purpose in connection. He learned that true richness wasn't measured by numbers on a screen, but by the lives touched along the way. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness can come from the smallest hands and change the biggest lives, please take a moment now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps spread messages that matter. Before the ending, we have a special request for you. Please comment below with the word kindness if you believe compassion can change the world, or share a moment when a child or stranger restored your faith in humanity. Because sometimes, when everything we rely on fails us, it takes the pure heart of a poor little girl to remind us what wealth truly means.